What is up, everyone? Roy here, and you are listening to the Clemenz with a Z podcast. Today, we dive deep into another powerful installment of the ongoing series, We Were in a Cult. And this segment is dedicated to uncovering the experiences of individuals who are part of the International Churches of Christ, or ICOC, a group often described as having cult-like behaviors and their journeys of healing, reflection, and growth. In this episode, I sat down with Max, whose story highlights the complexities of becoming involved in such an environment. Max is still a member of the church affiliated with the ICOC, having grown up within the church without fully understanding the depth of hurt, trauma, and manipulation that many have experienced. Together, we explore how he became a part of the ICOC, what drew him in, and the pivotal moments that have shaped his perspective as he begins to reckon with these difficult truths. This conversation is layered and deeply complex. It shines a light on how people can approach stories of trauma within a church with an open heart and mind, while somehow holding on to their faith. Max's journey illustrates the delicate balance between questioning and belief, showing that faith can endure even in the face of painful revelations. It also underscores the tension between seeking clarity and maintaining a connection to a community that has profoundly shaped one's life. Now, my goal in these conversations is not just to share stories, but to create a space where listeners can find understanding, validation, and hope. Whether you've had similar experiences or are curious about what a life in a high control religious group is like, I hope this episode sheds light on the importance of reclaiming your voice and redefining your beliefs. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join as we listen to Max's incredible journey. Let's get started. All right, we are live. What's up, Max?
What up?
I am glad that you are here to do this, be part of this conversation. That is, we were in a cult. So let's jump right in. Let's start this thing, huh?
Sounds great.
So,
Thanks for
how
having me
did,
on, man. Appreciate it.
yeah, man. I appreciate you coming on and doing this. Um, so how'd you get involved with the ICOC?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I stumbled onto your podcast and I really enjoyed listening to it. I think that you do a good job of, I think sometimes when I listen to some of the other podcasts, not to slander or anything like that, but I think that there's can be like kind of like a, like a wine fest or like a bash session of like all the horrible things. And I just feel like yours is very fair as far as plenty of commiseration, well deserved, but also I appreciate that you also have people point out positive things as well. So it's like, okay, like there's some good, but so I was like I'm a Kingdom kid.
Hmm.
My parents were, to make a long story really short, my dad got into some trouble. And he kind of basically was like, if I continue in this lifestyle, then I'm going to go down a bad path. So he kind of like converted himself. He started going to Church of Christ that his parents went to, and he got baptized in the Church of Christ. And then he told my mom that if she wanted to marry him, that she also had to get baptized. So
Mm.
they both got baptized in the Church of Christ, and then their schooling brought them to Alabama, where they essentially kind of assimilated them with the ICOC back then. This was probably the late 80s, early 90s. And so I was born in 88. And so somebody told them at some point that Atlanta is a place to go if you have kids. And at the time, they were both doing their degrees. My dad was at AUM. My mom was at Faulkner, which is also over in Alabama. So when they finished all that, I guess my dad got a job over at Stone Mountain. And so that's the first ministry that we were a part of was Stone Mountain. And it was awesome. It was one of the cool things I'll say about growing up in that church was that as a white person, I was a minority. So I didn't really like understand a lot about um, I'll just say it was a unique place to grow up. Like it was funny because when my parents moved me away from when we had to move from Stone Mountain, 'cause my dad got a different job, I went to a different school. And one of the first things that the people told me at the new school was, "Why do you act like you're black?" At the time, I just thought I was just being, myself. But it was a really great experience as a kid, though. I remember everyone was so warm, so nice. There's lots of dancing. Whenever my parents would go to like certain events or like get with their disciplers, quote unquote, like it was always a party. It was fun. It was very social. Um, but yeah, so we were in Stone Mountain, and then we moved over to Gwinnett, and we kind of followed the sea of like where, like most of us, like most people did back then, like where are all the kids going to be? So we were all in the same school, and your parents just found a way to make it happen. Kind of looking back at it now, it's kind of wild because so many so many people's parents sacrifice in some way, shape, or form just to have their kids all go to the same school. So
Hmm.
when I was in high school, the big high school was Berkmar, where a lot of the disciples' kids went, and then it kind of transitioned as I got older over to Peachtree Ridge. Um, but yeah, I mean I'm a Kingdom kid through and through.
Wow. Yeah. You that's interesting. Your dad converted himself.
Yeah, I know.
He knew
He he's
he
um
needed
he's kind of
something.
a no nonsense guy in a lot of ways. Like he's basically like, well, my life is not looking good, and I better fix that. And then once he's very stubborn and he's very headstrong. So
Hmm.
once he kind of has his mindset on something, that's just how it is. So
Gotcha.
he's not really looked back. My dad is an amazing, faithful man, and has been for a long time now.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting how you mentioned like the first place y'all were at in Atlanta. I was in Decatur for most of my early child years, and that was one thing that I noticed as well when we moved,
Yeah,
because my dad had got another job and we moved to a different part of town, and I noticed a big shift in who was around me. I remember being in my parents had Bible talk leaders meetings or Bible talk meetings in our house, and it was like my parents were the only white people in the room, and there were like 30 people, and that was just normal for
yeah,
us. And so it's just it was
absolutely.
it was interesting to grow up in that sort of realm of being with all that diversity, you know.
Yeah, I really loved it, man. I just felt like I felt really blessed, honestly, to
Hmm.
grow up like that because I just never knew a stranger, right? I mean,
Yeah. Hmm.
I never, and I feel I've always felt super comfortable, and I still do. And I still
Hmm.
feel very comfortable when I'm in Atlanta, being around all types of different people because I feel like that's what I grew up around,
Hmm.
specifically the African American community. Um, and I just always enjoyed that as part of my childhood and thought that was really fun.
Yeah. Awesome. So, what was your first image of God? Can you remember that? What was your view of God?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think growing up for me, God was kind of an authoritarian third parent, right?
Third
That
parent,
was,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's kind of what it was, right? But it was like very absent, right? So it's like
Yeah.
this
Hmm.
parent that you never really meet, but who always knows what you're doing
Yep.
somehow,
Hmm. Hmm.
and it's like very uninvolved. But you have to make sure that you're in line
Yeah.
because you don't want to disappoint that parent, even though they're not very involved in your life. So I think it was much more about behavior, right? So like one of the mottos that I remember is like, God loves good little boys, right? So it's like,
Mhm.
you know, if you were good and you did the right things all the time, then you had favor with God and God loved you and everything was gravy. But as soon as you faltered some, um, you know, that wasn't the case. And well, for me growing up, I just had a lot of energy and I was kind of nuts. So I I was getting in trouble a good bit. I was always throwing rocks, and I remember like being young and not trying to necessarily, but I guess I had bad aim. I hit my sisters with rocks. I mean, I just was always doing stuff to get in trouble. It seemed like when I was young, not like looking for mischief necessarily, but just doing stuff that boys do. Throwing rocks, hitting sticks, getting in the dirt, whatever. But I can remember thinking to myself, even as a young kid, like God was kind of again like this authoritarian figure. And I remember even at a young age feeling like people in the ICOC and the church I was a part of, although they were nice, it always kind of felt like everybody was winking at the same time, you know? Like everyone was kind of looking around like we're all on the same page, right? Like I guess the best.
Winking at the same time. No one's ever said that.
Oh, really?
What do you like you mean they were like they were all doing the exact same thing, like robotic kind of?
Yeah, like almost like watching each other. Like, are you sure you're into this, right? Like you bought into this too, right? Like, okay, like we're here
Oh,
now.
okay.
So like
Yeah.
I guess kind of like disingenuine, right?
Yeah.
Like performative almost to the point where, you know, even as a kid, I remember watching people being like, I don't think that you really being yourself right now. You know, like or just kind of having those thoughts as a child. I can vividly remember just feeling that people were not genuine.
Felt that more when I moved than when I did as a kid. Because I do remember that feeling of disingenuous, but it wasn't in the beginning. It was like, I don't know if it was because of where we moved in Atlanta. I mean, we moved in Atlanta where like a lot of the leaders' kids lived and stuff like that, like those type of neighborhoods, and maybe that's what I was getting. But it was definitely a shift. It was like there was a show, something was going on, you know?
Yeah, right. And
Mhm.
it's almost like if you just look around a little bit, it's almost like, it's almost like the Truman Show, right?
Yeah.
Like it's when Truman starts to kind of like look up and be like, okay, something just feels like unnatural about the way these people are behaving.
Hmm.
And not everybody, right? I mean, I'm not trying to generalize everybody, but I'm just telling you like that. I just remember having these thoughts as a kid, which is weird, right? But I've never been
Yeah.
a
Hmm.
I've never been able to fake. I've never had that quality. I'm not a good liar. And what is it they used to truthful Tourette's. Like I
Hmm.
just as soon as I try to lie, like, or I did as a kid, my parents would be like, "Oh, you're lying." I'd be like, "Yeah, I mean, I'm lying."
Yeah, you did get
And
a
then
feeling that like everyone was gonna say the exact same thing. Like if you went to, it didn't matter who you went to, they were gonna say the same thing the other person was gonna say, you know? It's like they were
yeah,
reading off a
and it
script
just was almost like
sometimes.
no it's almost like nobody wanted to like allow themselves to be like, "Man, I'm having a rough week. I'm having a
Hmm.
tough time. I'm not doing well." It's almost like it's like the ingredient for that was put a smile on, like tough it out, and don't let anybody see that you're having a rough time. And so people would show up and they would be, using all the kingdom lingo. Hey man, brother, I'm so fired up right now, brother. But like inside, they're like, you know, just had this massive blowout fight with their spouse or whatever it might have been, right? Or maybe they lost their job, or maybe they're just in a place in life where they're just not doing well. And I never felt like I remember seeing people like kind of genuinely go through life because I mean, Roy, I mean, life is tough.
Hmm.
And the church should be a place where you can come to and have respite, right? And be like, man, I've had a terrible week. I'm not doing well. I didn't even want to come to church this morning, but I'm here to praise and worship God. And I'm grateful that I made it out here. But like, it was hard, you know?
Yeah. Hmm.
And I just felt like, I guess it was kind of missing that ingredient maybe a little bit. And I think and I'm sure we're going to get into this as well, but obviously that was kind of the culture of the church in general, right? Is what is the facade? What are we putting forth to people? What are they going to think of us? You know, so on and so forth.
Yeah, it was like we were always selling something and we had to sell this place as the place, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
Hmm.
It's
And
like Christians couldn't be sad.
yeah. And there was a point like I had to actively search to find people that I trusted. As I got older, like I had to I luckily I was able to find 4 or 5 guys out of the sea of the church that I could trust and talk and be real with. Um, and it was hard. It was hard to find those people because, you would like, I never trusted my discipling partners. Because they would be saying a lot of the
Hmm.
same things, very surfacey, stuff. And it
Would they
just never,
tattle on you like to your higher
Mhm.
up?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got tattled on a few times. And you did
Doesn't foster a lot of
besides,
trust, does it?
oh man, I didn't trust any, but see, it was weird. Like, I don't think it wasn't that I didn't trust. I just, it's like this was the culture. I don't know. It's weird. It's a weird way to look at it. Like I was like, on one hand, I knew that I didn't like this. I guess what it was like I just found the people I could really talk to, and I just really talked to them, and I gave everyone else the performance. So I was doing the
Hmm.
same thing everyone else was doing. I just found the people I could talk to within the thing, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah, I performed a
Yeah,
lot.
100%. I mean,
Hmm.
you find people that you could be real with, right? Like it's almost like you're all a part of the same system. And then you go out with a buddy of yours and you wait to see if he orders a beer before you order
Hmm.
one. And you're like, is
Yep.
he gonna do that? Okay, I'll get one too. And then you start talking, and you're like, wait a minute, like, do you think this too? And then you're like, it's all of a sudden you have like this
Hmm.
this like
Yeah.
revelation. But the funny thing, about me growing up in the church was that, I had some unbelievable friends. If one thing growing up in the church, I just got really fortunate in that there was a bunch of guys my age that were forced to hang out with me at first, as an awkward kid, and they probably didn't want to. And then later on, as the years went by, we all became like insanely good friends. I mean, would have died for each other. And I'm still friends with a lot of those guys to this day. Um, but we all hated the church. So there was
That's
uh
interesting.
there was
I-
no faking to be had, because
yeah.
we when we were in middle school, we named ourselves the double OC, the outcasts of the church. We were edgy, man.
Oh man, I want to talk so much about that, but I want to pause to get back to this one thing because
Yeah.
it's weird because you mentioned like the tattling and the trust. It's just weird because like growing up in it, it was like I associated like this was the place. So this must be what it's going to be like forever. Like this is what heaven's going to be like. This is what God, like this is how God operates. Like this, because
Oh
like
no. Oh no.
because like because I kind of somehow it put into my brain. So like it wasn't that like yeah, I found the people and I had someone to talk to, but there were points before I found those people that it was like I felt shame for not trusting these people because this is the place where you're supposed to trust the people, right?
Hmm.
So it's just that
Yeah,
was a
yeah.
point that I wanted to make sure that I said because it just was weird how this was how this is how it always had been, you know? I saw
Yeah.
this from my parent with my people in my parents' house, what they were discipling, and then you would just see it before campus devos and teen devos and stuff like that. So luckily, I was able to kind of like navigate my way through it and find people that I could latch on to. And then also when the letter
Yeah.
happened, that kind of helped too, but we'll talk about that later. Um,
Yeah,
but
certainly.
but yeah, so you had in middle school, you said they were forced to hang out with you. What do you mean by that?
Well, so when I moved from Stone Mountain over to Gwinnett, I was a pretty awkward kid. I
Hmm.
had, I have two sisters. I didn't grow up with any brothers. And then I move into Gwinnett, and there's this really tight knit group of guys already established. So I had to kind of break into that group. So
Okay.
they would always have slumber parties every weekend, pretty much, because there was always church affiliated events going on, right?
Hmm.
So that's, so you would always be doing something every single weekend. But so after those, they would always spend the night at somebody's house. That was just what we did back then. And initially, I felt really left out, right? And because I was never invited to stay over initially, and then eventually, the one of the moms, I
Oh
love,
God.
she was so amazing. She was like not going to let me be left out, so she basically forced me to come there as well. So she would basically like be like, Max is going to come too. And initially, maybe one or two of the kids, one of them I was already good friends with, but anyways, um, we're like, I don't really want Max to come, but it ended up fine. We ended up all becoming great friends, and I ended up kind of working my way into their group, and they all accepted me, and man, we were mean to each other. I mean, like, but I never had that as brothers, right? Brothers,
Yeah.
the way you show your love is you just absolutely roast the tar out of each other.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I had really ever been exposed to that. Let me tell you, Roy, I got away with nothing. There
Oh
was
yeah.
nothing that, I mean, whether I got my hair cut, I bought a new shirt. I mean, I got tore up all the time.
That's hilarious.
But I loved every second of it, and I learned how to give it back. And those are some of my best friends I ever had, and still are to this day.
That's
But
awesome.
no, so we were really tight, and we were all in middle school, and none of us wanted to study the Bible. So, and this is back in the days, like where people in middle school were like going through the study series and getting baptized.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like I remember there was a couple of kids that were eighth graders in my middle school. And middle school was like teen ministry back then. Middle school was like you need to be maturing into a disciple at this point, right? Um, and luckily, one of the dads who was an awesome middle school, God bless this man for being a middle school teacher back then, because we were absolute ruffians. I mean, there's this one poor guy they brought in to help him, and he told us he wanted to be called a certain name. That was the first mistake. We just man, this guy, and he came up to us genuinely. He goes, guys, can you please just call me this name? And we're like, sure. And then we didn't do it.
Jeez. Y'all
Yeah, we
didn't give
were
him in.
no, we were rough, man. And but he told us, he said, you guys are young, you guys are pretty bad kids. So right now is probably not a good time for y'all to be studying the Bible. And honestly, like I felt like that was some pretty good advice, even back then.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I appreciated his honesty with me, because I think nobody had really told me that, like, yeah, you're just not mature enough to do this, dude. Like you are a pretty rough little 12, 13-year-old here. And and all of our friends was like, we just all we wanted to do is see who could goof off the most in class on Wednesday nights. So it was yeah, but again, man, it was some of the most fun I think I've ever had in my life during those times.
Sure. And so why did you hate church so much then though? Because you said
I
you
think for the
didn't.
same reasons yeah, I mean, I think for the same reasons. I think we felt like a lot of people were hypocritical.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think even at that age, so this is probably just before the letter.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, because I could still see a lot of the hypocrisy, I think. And my parents, they're awesome, but they only wanted to talk to me about God, and I was just not interested in hearing about God anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think, I don't know, I've always been the kind of person that has to kind of like figure things out for myself and find my own way. And I just wasn't willing to take people's words for it. We just would hear all these lessons all the time about how God's amazing and God does these things and whatever. But like somehow God doesn't like me because I'm a bad kid or whatever it might be. Whatever thoughts I had at my time, I was just like, I don't think God wants much to do with me, really. And I think that I wanted to have fun. So like I wanted to do things that I am in my eyes were fun back then, whether it I really wasn't that bad of a kid. I wasn't like, sneaking off to the bathroom to smoke cigarettes or whatever. But we were just genuinely being like little boys, I guess. Just kind of crazy and all over the place. But um, yeah, I think I'm trying not to ramble, sorry, but I think the big thing is just that we just saw this massive amount of disingenuousness and what we thought was hypocrisy back then. And I just feel like I want to know part of it. You know,
Hmm.
I think I could just remember being like, I don't know what is right, but I feel like this is not it.
Wow. Now, was it the people in charge or was it the other kids in the church or both?
What was that? Sorry.
Was it sort of you said you were seeing the hypocrisy and all of the disingenuousness? Was it the the leaders, the people in charge, or was it the kids or in the ministry, or was it a little bit of both?
I think it was everything. I mean, the kids I knew that were disciples, some of them were really awesome. Some of them were very genuine and really trying. I think, and then, but I think it was mainly the adults. I don't know if it was the way they treated me. Some of them were really impatient with me. Some of them were really
Hmm.
rude. And again, this is not totally undeserving. I'm not saying that I was an angel,
Sure.
but I just think that for some reason it's like I talked about before. It just all felt performative. And then it's like you make someone mad and it's like, oh, they snap and all of a sudden they're who they truly are now, you know? And I think when you're young and you're kids, you can kind of see that in people that like this person's probably not really a great guy person, but they're trying to act this way. I'd rather you just be who you are, you know?
Hmm.
Um, and so yeah, I don't know exactly what it was, and I'm sure we all just kind of fed off of each other too when you're that young. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, none of us really, we were into girls, we were into, stuff that teenage boys are into. Um, we used to make our own Jackass videos because that was huge back then, right?
Yep.
So
I did one in campus. Uh-huh.
yeah, I mean
Uh-huh.
that's what everyone did. Um, I remember a vivid story, and I won't say who, but obviously, but we used to go hang out at a certain household a lot because it was full of boys, and that was kind of the weekend hangout spot. And it was a certain family that had all boys, and they were all older than me. So I was best friends with the youngest, and the oldest, though, who was in high school at the time, was making Jackass video in the backyard, and they had they made one of the guys like drop down to his drawers, and he was wearing tidy whities,
Uh-huh.
and they pulled him across the yard on it with a garden hose.
So here's this is going to be funny. I was there. I wasn't the guy being pulled the garden hose, but I was there. I know exactly what you're talking about. I was in the yeah. Isn't that funny?
That is wild. So I was probably like in middle school at that point. And I remember that him saying like, "Hey, you better not throw stuff at me when you do this. Like, you better not do
Yeah.
that." And
Yeah.
everyone
Hmm.
being like, "We won't." And then literally as soon as they started pulling him, everybody just started pelting him with stuff.
And
Anyways, sorry.
I'm digressing because it's
Yeah.
funny that this is happening, that you were there because it started at my house and we
Oh,
were
really?
essentially we got too loud and a neighbor came out. And so we drove all the way from where I lived to that house to finish the video. Yeah. Yeah, there was a guy
What?
who he like elbow dropped a bush in their backyard. Um, Stuff like that. There's a few other things that we won't talk about here. But yeah, I was there. That's hilarious.
Well, Roy, I want you to know that you are our inspiration, man.
And let the record show I wasn't the guy that was being pulled in his underwear.
No, it was not you. It was not you.
Um, but what's interesting is I think when you're a kid, you can see through the BS a lot more than adults. And you can tell, like, I noticed this with me when I was a teacher. The kids could tell when, like, I was being real or not. And
Yeah.
they would always be closer with me or they would open up to me more when they trusted that I was being like honest, I was myself.
Hmm.
And I do think, and maybe you noticed this too, but like once someone got baptized, they talk different, they act different. It was like they were reading. It comes back to that performance. It was like reading from a script in a
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, and and I also want to say this too though, because I think this
Hmm.
is fair. I also recognize when people were genuine.
Yeah. Hmm.
And there were a lot and there were a lot of I want to say there was a lot of genuine people, and there still are. But like,
Hmm.
I remember as a kid, I guess I don't want to use names, even if it's a shout out, but I remember there was older people that my parents would get with, and they would ask how I was doing. They were always interested in my life.
Hmm.
And you could just tell that they exuded what I would call the Holy Spirit, which is just this kind of embalming, um, aura of um, of God's love. And I
Yeah.
remember at the time I couldn't put a label on it, but yeah, that was also very impactful to me because
Hmm.
there was times when I certainly did not deserve anybody being nice to me, and and I also got a lot of that as well. So it's a little bit of both, right? But I also feel
Well,
like I want to acknowledge that as well.
that's what makes sometimes talking about this challenging because there were and there are genuine people that are a part of this. I could probably name half a dozen adults when I was a kid. I'm lucky in that. And so it can be challenging when we're in this space of like the cult word is being used because it just makes it feels like sometimes I feel like calling it the cult means they were wrong, these people that were genuine to me. And I think where I've gotten to this is I can celebrate the genuineness for being genuine and the other stuff for the toxic stuff, the hurtful things, the trauma, all of that for what it was. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, absolutely. And I know that we're probably going to get more into that as well, potentially, but I think you can't attribute um, some bad apples, obviously, overall to the
Hmm.
organization of people. I mean, if you have groups of people, large groups of people, there's always going to
Hmm.
be people who, and this, I mean, there's a million examples of this, right? I mean, this is not something that we really need to get into and necessarily, but I think that's the main point is that I would have at least is that um, just because there were some egregious things about the history and how things were handled in the church growing up does not mean that Christianity itself is horrible, right?
Hmm.
It obviously means that there's people, there's humans. I mean, there's stories all over the Bible, of course, that you and I could get into if we wanted to, and talk about how God uses these people who are incredibly broken. It's still sad. It's still not good, and it's not justifying or trying to um, make amends for anything necessarily,
Hmm.
right? Or even nullify anybody's experience. It's just more so the reality of life, I guess, is what I would say. Um, and so yeah, I think, and I know we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but I think I wouldn't have never been able to come back to this church and church in general if I had
Hmm.
not known so many genuine, loving, amazing people that had no idea anything was going on that was wild in the church. They were there, they were
Hmm.
committed to following Jesus, they were doing the best they could. Most of them were not in this upper echelon of the pyramid of leadership that was the old school ICOC. But anyway,
Yeah. No, it's a lot of you brought up a lot of things to talk about
I
um
know, sorry.
that I want to address later in the conversation just to kind of think, but like I guess the you can't negate the good because there was bad that happened. You kind
Right.
of have to like, and you can't negate the bad because good happened. Does that make, I said it right. Like I said, the good, negate the good because the bad, and you can't negate the bad because the good happened. Like both happened.
Right. You can't excuse, right.
Yeah,
You can't
yeah.
excuse behavior that
Mm-hmm.
happened, and you can't
Mm-hmm.
excuse things that were done really poorly
Mm-hmm.
by people that really weren't mature enough to make good decisions,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you can also say it's like for some reason in our world, we really want to grab onto certain binary thinking when it comes to certain topics. You can only be this or you can only be that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think in our society today, for some reason, that's just become more polarized as people keep saying. And I think there certainly is an element of truth to that. Um, it's like we can't hold on the same, in the same two hands that like there was horrible things that were done that are inexcusable, and I think God will
Mm-hmm.
not be mocked, right? But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, I think that there was also amazing things that happened. I will say quickly that, my dad, he loved being a part of the ICOC back then because he felt like he really needed somebody to help him understand how to be a Christian and a disciple, how to treat his wife,
Mm-hmm.
how to treat his kids. And he just didn't have those skills. His dad was fairly uninvolved in his life. He was a great man. No slight to my grandfather, if he's listening to this, right? And my grandfather can't even work a DVD player, so I don't think
I think you're
yeah,
good. Mm-hmm.
yeah. Um, but anyways, and he really credits the people in his life, and he doesn't ever have. So I again, this is just his own experience that he's talked to me about many times, but he never had a coercive or manipulative discipler. And so in his eyes, he's whenever everything's going awry, he's like, man, I needed this. Like I wasn't a good husband. I wasn't a good father all the time. I wasn't necessarily, I didn't have these inherent things that I could figure out on my own. And the whole
Mm-hmm.
discipling relationship for me was excellent, right? It really helped save my marriage, save my relationship with God and with my wife and with my kids. Um, so again, I think there for every experience you have, I hope it'd be more so you'd have experiences of people who are
Mm-hmm.
really helped.
Well, the thing is, it's not always that.
No,
And but that's kind of why I want this platform to be the way it is a place where things can be discussed and people can share so other people can listen
yeah,
and people can see because my experience is worlds apart from your experience and we were in the
right,
same thing from people I know, my friends. They all had different experiences. Some people's experience is it was a geographical thing. They were a part of one of the big churches, and so there was more pressure on them. But somebody in, the middle of nowhere probably didn't have the same experience because they weren't watched as much or they weren't in the spotlight as much, and so, but I also want to feel like, I guess I just want it to feel like we can talk about it all because it deserves to be talked about, but not in a way that like not talking about the good in the way that minimizes people's pain and people's trauma, right? Because I think that
sure,
that's
yeah,
something that needs to be it just needs to be addressed. And there's things about the system and at large, and that's how it became the way it did, and we can talk about that. But it's this, I don't think that this is I think there's some things that are it's a binary thing. Things that happened were bad. There's some things.
yes,
And that's not going to go that I can't that's just how it is. But there's some things that are like, I don't know. It's weird. Hold on. I live in the pathway of helicopters. I live in between
okay,
two bases, and I'm gonna keep that in because sometimes Black Hawks fly down the beach at like
oh right,
30 feet in the air.
Nice.
That's just what I don't know if you heard. Did you hear that?
No, I didn't hear anything.
Oh, good. Yay. Because it shook the house. Anyway, I lost my train
Wow.
of thought. Um, but
No,
I
it's
think
all. No, I hear. Go ahead.
I guess what I'm just it's like there's a lot of things it's a complicated issue. That's just what it is.
Yeah, and I certainly don't want to seem like I'm simplifying it in any way,
Hmm.
because I have also experienced bad discipling relationships. I have in listening to some of the episodes. Some of the stories were hard to hear,
Hmm.
because I wouldn't count myself having a great ICOC experience, but I certainly had nothing close to some of those people. And I don't say that to like, it's I, I guess it's just luck of the draw in a sense, right? Like
Hmm.
I didn't experience other than just, my parents being ultra strict my whole life, really. Um, and not letting me really engage with the world too much until I was out of the house. Um, you know, I was never told what I could and couldn't wear at church. Um, you know, I mean, well, I probably was. I probably tried to wear like cutoff jeans or something like that, or JNCOs back in the day, man.
Heck yeah. I wore JNCOs to church all the time. I did not care.
Yeah. Um, but no, I think my main point, or the thing I would convey, is that I think a lot of people were there doing their best, and what you hear about a lot of is the bad things, certainly. And again, that's not excusable. I'm not trying to make light of that. I just think simultaneously as well, there were many people that were there that were doing the best they could that had no idea of what was going on, at many of those levels. Or even if they did, again, I don't think most of it was handled very well. And again, I'm sure we're going to get into that, so I don't want to jump the gun too much. Um, but I guess, with every institution, with a lot of people, there's going to be problems. And I'm not saying that means that everything that happened in the IC is okay back then. What I'm saying is that you're going to have issues.
Hmm.
But I think with the thing that separates the ICOC in the past from other entities is that it was handled horribly in the ICOC, horribly. And I think that goes back to the roots of the organization, which I'm sure we're going to talk about later. But
Hmm.
um, I think again, you can have good things, but the bad was really bad.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Pitch jump. Oh my gosh. There's so many things I want to say. I want to pause on this part just to kind of get because I want to get to like what got you into studying the Bible? What shifted you? What made you want to be a part of this church? Because
Yeah,
if you're
yeah.
seeing this disingenuous, this performative nature as a kid, what shifted in you to want to be a part of it or want to be baptized?
So I was a senior in high school, and my mom asked me to take my little sister to church to teen midweek, and I hadn't been in a while. I stopped going when I was a junior in high school. They finally let me, because I was old for my grade. I turned 17 my junior year. So they were like, if you don't, you're 17 years old, you're going to be out of the house in a year or two. If you don't want to go to church anymore, you don't have to. So I said, okay, I'm not going. Um,
Wow, so
and
you weren't studying the Bible at all in high school.
I think that I did a character study or two
Uh-huh.
just to like do something, but like it wasn't really
Okay.
anything I was interested in. No.
All right.
Yeah, no, I mean, so really I was in high school, I was doing my own thing. I said all my friends had already pretty much left at that point, because I think the poor team ministers we had, man, God bless them. They they had to deal with us ruffians, and I think eventually they told our parents, not me, because I was always, I always sat down, I was respectful for the most part, but like some of my friends would come to midweek, teen midweek we had at the courthouse back then in Gwinnett, and they would just peace out. And like the team minister was like, I can't be responsible. Like their kids are supposed to be here, and I can't make them be here, and I can't just have them wandering around downtown Lawrenceville. So, so he like told their parents like they're not allowed to come back. So if they want to come, that's on them. But like I can't be responsible for them anymore. So anyway, I stopped going, and So I was at a kind of interesting point in my life where I just got out of a long relationship in high school. It sounds so funny to say now that I'm like 36. Like
It's okay.
somehow
Yeah.
I was in a rough patch at 17 years old.
Heartbreak
Um,
is heartbreak, man.
oh yeah, it was hard on me, that breakup, big time, when this girl I dated in high school for a year. So we broke up, and I was kind of aimless, doing my thing, and I went to this midweek, and the guy that was leading our team ministry at the time was an awesome dude. A lot of respect for him, and he preached a sermon. I don't even remember what it was about, but I just remember thinking to myself, like, this is speaking to me for some reason. And my life has been kind of a mess in some ways. I've been super selfish, and I think this. I remember thinking, I don't know exactly how this path is going to look, but this is what I got to do.
Hmm.
So I started studying the Bible, and I got baptized my senior year, 2006, right before I graduated in 2007, but I got baptized in December 2006. Um, and it was like awesome, right? My parents were super stoked. Like my dad and I, who had a not a good relationship up at that point, he like would kind of like speak with me now. I was a disciple.
Wow.
Yeah, like, we don't have to get into all that, but my
Hmm.
my dad's awesome, but he's just I don't think his strength was always investing in his kids. I just don't think he had those foundations sometimes, or knew exactly what to do. But and he was fairly hard on me as well in different times in my life. But I remember becoming a disciple, it was like, man, like my dad loves me. I remember thinking that, like, for the first time, in like a while, like, man, my dad really approves of what I'm doing. And that wasn't why I did it, but I just remember thinking that, like, so things
Hmm.
were going good. And then but like, it was a weird time in the team ministry because the letter had come out not too long ago. And I think everybody was so afraid to do anything. So like, I don't really know what being a disciple was. I mean, so, I had a group of guys and they were disciples, but like, I think everyone was just kind of doing their own thing, and like, so, for better or for worse, I mean, um, it's like I was stuck in a weird place because I had all my best friends who I grew up with who are not disciples at all, and they were like, hey, let's go drive around at 3 in the morning and smoke pot and drink in a car, like, just like straight up asking to get arrested. Um, and then they had my other church friends, and I wasn't quite worked into that crowd. So I feel like a lot of times on the weekends, nights, I was just sitting at home by myself, because I just, I would try to hang out with people. And like, don't get me wrong, like the dudes were nice, like, the disciple guys, they would hang out with me, they would, but like we didn't like, we weren't like really tight.
Yeah. Hmm.
So I felt like I was always kind of having to try and get my way into I didn't really fit in with the disciple crowd that was there, quote unquote disciple. But anyways, I graduated high school, went to college, and I got to the campus ministry in Atlanta, and these dudes were like disciples, man. Like they were like old school ICOC. Like we were door knocking, we were inviting people to Bible talk during the week. I remember one of the best stories was I had like no finesse, man. I mean, I was just like a
Uh-huh.
bull, so at the time I was a freshman in college, and there was this, so we were inviting people to go to Bible talk, and we were walking through campus, and there's this girl walking past us, and it's just me and my buddy. I went to this girl, and she walked past us, and I said, "Hey, you going home?" And she just goes, "No," and she like runs away.
That's terrible. That's not something
I
you want to
know,
shout out to a woman in the streets.
I know, dude. Like, just dude, if there was a naive person, like
Uh-huh.
archetype of college, that would have been me. I mean, I just had
Yeah.
no experience talking to people outside of our church, really. I mean, I went to a public high school, so like obviously I interacted with people, but like, I didn't know how to invite people to church. So like what they told me to do was you would try to like come up with something that wasn't like, hey, come to my Bible talk. You would be like, hey, what are you up to? And that way they'd be like, oh, I'm gonna go do this. And you'd be like, oh, when or if they'd be like, oh, I'm just walking around, because then they couldn't get out of it unless they would be like, oh, actually, I just don't want to come to this. You know,
Yeah.
so they gave us these
Well,
strategies.
it sounds like though, so just to get back, so the studies went great, you get baptized and things are going good. It's interesting how you say you were like they didn't know how to be disciples in high school. And then there's like these were the disciples, like this. But it seems like it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
good. Like this was fulfilling you. This was giving you like purpose and hope and that
It
kind of
was.
thing.
It was
Hmm.
good for me at the time. It was good for me at the time, certainly, and I think it really helped me in a lot of ways. Um,
Hmm.
and 100%. But I think I had no idea what I was doing. And
Sure.
it was me and my team minister, and I think my team minister, who's an awesome guy, was he was kind of afraid to like. I remember like I would tell him like, oh yeah, blah blah blah, like I made out with my girlfriend last week. He'd be like, okay, well just don't do that again. And I'd be like, oh okay. Like
Yeah,
that was the
those
conversation.
the years right after the letter, those couple years after the letter, it was like no one really knew what to do or how to be. That was just kind of like I remember in campus we had a big Devo that was called No Rules, Just Right. And they were kind of essentially saying, hey, we're not going to have these like rules anymore. We're going to trust you that you know what's right. And it was just like, but what
Yeah,
inevitably happens is a lot of people left. They went off and did their own thing. But some people, it was just like we were just making it up as we went. And in a lot of ways, that's great, you know? But when you go from having like 100% rules to like very little, it's kind of weird, you know? What do I do with this? You
yeah,
know?
right. And I think people were just afraid to speak up because we had
Hmm.
one team minister before the one I was telling you about, and he was like really hardline, and so they got rid of him, and so they brought this other guy in, and again, both of them were great people, just had different approaches.
Hmm.
Um, and
Yeah.
so I guess what I'm saying is I just didn't really feel like I knew what that meant. But I remember showing up to campus my first day at Kennesaw State and reading my Bible, having a quiet time. Like I remember doing that and like praying and being like, let's have a good semester. And then and then I left at the end of the semester. I
That's
left the
funny.
church. Yeah, I mean it
So you
what's
left
that?
the church? You left the church, or
Mm,
like you quit going, or you just didn't go to that school anymore?
no, no. So I after the first semester, campus ministry was very much like the traditional ICOC in a lot of ways. Campus ministry was,
Hmm.
and it's in Atlanta especially. A lot of very genuine people, but like a lot of legalism, a lot of setting numerical goals for baptisms. A lot of that was the kind of the overarching theme was like we got to really baptize people. We got to baptize people. So you're always kind of pressured to be sharing with people, being in Bible studies, and then it was a busy schedule. Like you had church on Sundays, then you had like a Bible talk leaders meeting on after church, and then you had your devos, and then you had your own Bible talk, and then you had to go on dates on the weekends. So at the time, I was trying to be a musician, and so I was like really in the thick of that, and I was practicing constantly, and I was trying to you know, that's why I went to Atlanta and not Athens because all my friends went to Athens and I was the only person that went to Atlanta out of my graduating class. That was part of the church. But so anyway, I just kind of got beat down and I was kind of like, I don't really know if this is what I signed up for. This is what I want to do. Like, I think there's gods out there. I think that there is
Hmm.
God, but like, I don't know. This is just weird for me right now because I feel like I'm getting pressured. I feel like I don't want to get too much into that, tangential things. But anyway, so at the end of the semester, the campus minister sat me down. It was basically like, if you leave, you're like, he read to me that verse in Hebrews that talks about once you've essentially, left, you can't come back because you're essentially blasphemed the name of God and the Holy Spirit. And
Jeez.
I know, dude, he laid it on thick, man. And he's a great brother. I love him to this day. And I think he was just doing the best that he thought he would to get me to not leave. But at the same time, like I think he would probably even say to this day that the execution was quite poor.
Yeah, man.
So I mean, I
Yeah.
think I think obviously looking back, what would you say? Like, hey, man, take your time, explore what you need to explore, but like just don't leave God. Like if you don't like our church, find something that you can fit with and that you can mesh with. But of course, the theme was more so like if you leave this church, then you're going to leave in God. And at that point, I was like, okay, is this it? We're done. Okay, bye. Like, so I just pieced out. And
Wow.
And
Well, that was how we handled things, because for a lot of us, it was this or nothing. That's just kind of that was how people thought. That's how it was
yeah,
sold to us, you know?
it's true. And it's weird though, because this was post letter, but the same culture kind of lived on through some of the campus ministry culture. And it's interesting that that's kind of where it kind of continued to um,
Mm.
manifest itself, because even I think it's changed now, but um, I don't, we don't have to talk about this, but anyways, it's just interesting that that's where it kind of stayed. Um, so
Yeah.
I left, and I think looking back at that, I don't think I left God. I think I just whatever was going on for there was just I felt like it was too much. It just didn't feel like what I read in the scriptures. Like and at the time I couldn't articulate that. But I mean, when you're reading the Bible and you're trying to understand the Gospels and you're trying to understand what the kingdom is and what is the gospel message and the euangelion, the good news, all those things, like in your mind, they're like, okay, the good news is you go baptize people because Jesus died for you. And you better get out there and go do that. And that, years later, I learned that's not what the gospel is. But
Hmm.
that was kind of what was hammered into you at a young age was that because Jesus died for you, you you are now bound to this life of servitude and servanthood and meekness and lowliness, and just groveling, and kind of
Yeah.
earning your way back step by step into, potentially being worthy enough to go into heaven, right? So of course that just breeds a really weird culture and atmosphere kind of
Hmm.
all around you. But so I just felt like I had to get out of that. I remember specifically I was sitting at a Devo at Georgia Tech, and Douglas Jacoby was talking, and I said, I just remember looking up and thinking to myself, you know what? I don't agree with any of this anymore. I was like, I think this is my last midweek, and I left like,
Wow.
I love Douglas, but I probably shouldn't use his name. Sorry. Whoops.
It's fine. So I think it's good. It's cool that you were able to see a need to like, I'm not like not celebrating the leaving as yeah, you left. It's just you saw that you couldn't be here anymore and you needed to take a step to figure things out. You didn't know what it was, but right now this wasn't the place. And I think there's a lot of people, I felt it too, like I didn't like what was going on, but I didn't want to leave because leaving meant death and hell. And so it's cool that you were able to see that in yourself and to take the steps for yourself. So,
Yeah, I think if I didn't have some friends that weren't a part of the church, it'd be tough because my
mhm.
friends did cut me off, all except for a couple. And those really one of those friends is the reason that I ended up coming back. Is
You
an
meant the
unbelievable
people in the
brother.
church cut you off? The people in the church cut you off?
Yeah, I mean, and like not like, but like I had some buddies that just like never called me again.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I would see them at the gym and or whatever at Kennesaw and would say what's up to each other. Only one guy who was converted. He wasn't a kingdom kid. He was converted later on. He would text me like once a month and ask me how I was doing, ask me if I hang out. And he was older and he had a job, so he would just take me out for dinner. We would just talk.
Wow.
And yeah, it was he was. I mean, I legitimately think he was an angel. Like he really poured himself into me when he didn't have to. We were I have to tell the story because it's really funny. But when I moved to Kennesaw, I was looking for a roommate, a disciple, and so he was at Kennesaw, but he was kind of older. He was like almost 30, and he was just getting his degree because Kennesaw was still kind of a commuter college in those days. But it was just becoming this big university back then.
I know. I went there. I got
Oh,
my
did
degree
you?
from there. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. So he was there, and he was this ex-LA gangster who moved away from LA because he was literally getting away, escaping a gang. Um, and so here you have this rando white kid from the suburbs of Atlanta living with this LA Chicano gangster. And we couldn't have been better friends. I mean, we got along so well and had so much fun together. as roommates. And I think he just really saw our bond as like being brothers. He was like my big brother, and even though I left the church, he was almost hurt. He was like, I don't care that you're leaving the church, but why can't we be friends anymore? And I was totally expecting him just to like cut me. And he probably was told like, hey, Max, that dude's an apostate. Like, don't hang out with that guy. Like he left. Like, but he was stubbornly loyal to me
Hmm.
during that time, and that was really special.
Yeah, being seen and heard by people is a very powerful thing. That it's a make or break kind of thing, you know. And that's awesome that you had that. I wish that there were more stories like that, because a lot of people get cut off, and it's like, you know, you're you're just no longer around. I mean, I did that to people too. I cut people off
Oh
when they
yeah.
quit coming and, stuff like that. And that was just the culture. It was the culture of things. So, yeah. Well, it's good that you had that. What was it life like leaving? It sounds like you're really only like there was only like a year or two that you actually were like a part of it, and then you left.
Yeah, so really, I mean, it was like the one semester of my high school, and then I lasted one semester in college. I always joke around. I was like, I lasted for one semester there, but and then I left
Hmm.
for a year and a half, and then so he kept in touch with me that whole time. No, at first it was awesome, man. I was partying with my buddies and doing all the things I thought I wanted to do that I couldn't do.
Hmm.
And thought I was a musician in Atlanta. I was working, I was gigging, I was playing really fun shows. Played a show with Michael Bolton.
That's cool.
And yeah, I mean,
Michael
I
Bolton.
did some really, I know, right? This is before he kind of like had a weird little resurgence too. So it was like
Uh-huh.
at this little dinky amphitheater in South Atlanta. Anyways, it was fun, but just got to do some like really cool studio gigs and play with some really fun people and artists and celebrities and stuff, and thought I was kind of living the life.
Yeah.
And and then I just got really unfulfilled, and I feel like I was kind of at the peak of what I thought I wanted out of life, right? And I was like, man, this kind of sucks. Um, so much so to the point where I was like, maybe I should go back. But it was insanely hard to go back, I'll say. Um,
Why?
there was definitely a couple of times where I drove to the parking lot of the church and just put my car in reverse and went and just left.
Wow.
Oh man, it
Why
was
was it
hard.
hard to go back?
I think you feel shame, right? I felt like people were going to judge me, and they probably did. I mean, whatever. As soon as I walked through the door, I felt like people were going to be like, "What is he doing back?" Like, you know, I wasn't expecting much of a prodigal son moment in the
Mhm.
in the with the reception. And to be fair, I mean, they did, they were skeptical or like, why are you back? But nobody was mean or rude or anything like that, obviously. And um, it was overall not a bad experience. It's probably more in my head than anything.
Mhm.
And just my own shame of like leaving and now kind of coming back and like being like, okay, I got my tail between my legs. Like I'm coming back after I told y'all it wasn't like I left on bad. I don't think I left on bad terms, but like they were more like, I feel like they were kind of more like the bad terms as far as like, well, we don't approve of you leaving. So
Mhm.
you're not in a good stance with us. But no, I mean I clicked back in after a few weeks, and it was like I had never left, I guess. But I did get restored. So I didn't get rebaptized, but
Being restored, was it like you had to go in front of a bunch of people or and like
no, so yes, but it was actually a really beautiful time, and I know that again, if that's not everyone's experience, I'm not trying to you know I don't know brag or anything strange like that, but it was just the two ministers of the church who I really respect sat me down and read the restoration of Peter with me, and of course we're all sitting there like bawling, and and they're talking about just it was really awesome. Like I really felt like they genuinely were happy and cared, and And so then, yeah, I just went in front of the church. Was that necessary? I don't know, man. Um, I was fine to do it at the time. I was really ecstatic to, I don't know. I just felt God's grace in that moment. Like I felt like I had really discovered forgiveness and just acceptance, and that things I just didn't understand before. And I think I was in a place where I could really understand more of that now than I was, when I had left previously. Um, and I also
Mhm.
obviously am coming off of like being a part of, engaging in revelry and all sorts of dumb things that I had kind of, I wasn't like I had like screwed my life up per se, but I had engaged in enough of it to know that it was incredibly unfulfilling.
Got it.
So I actually really enjoyed my restoration at the time. And yeah, to me, it was a special time. And it really going in front of the church, all I did was just say, hey, I'm back. I'm here. I really want to recommit my life to doing this. And I thanked the people that I felt like were helpful along the way, that really reached back out to me, because I really wanted to use it as a moment to say, listen, like if there's people that you know of that left the church for whatever reason, like look at me. Like people probably wrote me off a long time ago,
Hmm.
but please reach back out to those people and love them and care about them. Don't just, add to the their shame or whatever reason they left, right? I felt like I could use that as a platform to be able to speak about that to the people in the church who maybe have in the past just been like, whatever, that person's gone.
Got it. And so you get back and everything's been great, or was it yes and no? Like, how's it been since then?
No, not at all, man. I mean, I've been through so many iterations of my faith, I think. I've grown
Hmm.
so much. I feel like, no, when I got back, I was in campus, and again, I'll make this as brief as I can, but, I was in campus. I was very legalistic. I was very kind of like committed and did that whole deal.
Hmm.
I got out of
Yeah.
campus and I was very burnt out because I had been doing a performance-based Christianity filled with quotas and, whatever. And
So
so
you
I
got kind of right back into like what it was before, what you were
yeah,
saying. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I probably shared my faith with every single person on that campus. Like, there's people that would come up to me years after at North, with the church I go to, and
Hmm.
they would be like, "Hey, you studied the Bible with me like 2 years ago," you know, and so it was cool, but at the same time, again, I felt like I didn't feel like it was genuine. I don't think I had quite found that niche yet, but I was just doing what I felt like was the right thing to do,
Yeah.
which was just kind of just jump right back into it. And the group I had at Kennesaw was my family. I mean, it was the most tight knit group of people I'd ever been a part of. I mean, we were so tight. We did everything together. I mean, it was like really like a serious like an Acts 2 like community. I mean, we all shared our food with each other. We all hung out all the time. We just loved each other, and we loved being, and we attracted people that way, which was great. And it was very genuine. I didn't feel like it was anybody was being coerced at all. Um, but anyways, I got burned down on that a little bit. I went into the singles ministry, and that's where I really started to interact with my now wife more. And she was like, your biblical thinking is off. Like you are so hard on yourself, and your expectations are so much so that you're just completely missing out on grace. So I remember at the time she gave me two books. One of them was called The Pressure's Off. Another one was called In the Grip of Grace by Max Lucado, I think.
Mm.
Anyways, and that just helped me tremendously. And then from there, I just kind of continued to build my own faith. Um, and I feel like I'm just continuing to do that. And that's one of my favorite things about being a part of the kingdom is I feel like God's just going to continue to teach me for eternity. And
Hmm.
that just makes me so happy and excited to continue to walk with him through life, is that I'm going to always learn new things from him about
Hmm.
myself, about the world, about who he is. He's just constantly revealing things about his character. Um, and I guess I don't feel like I'm dependent on the church really at all for my, I think that I can lean into the church when I need to. But no, I'm just grateful in a lot of ways that I feel like the people that I've interacted with and kind of brought into my life have really helped me in my faith. Over the last, gosh, I don't know, 10 years at least now. I was restored in 2009. It was 2024 now. So
Wow.
it's been a while.
So it sounds like your view of God is it different than what it was when you were a kid?
Oh yeah, 1,000%. Yeah, I mean, God is just so much bigger than we can ever imagine. I mean,
Hmm.
it's not to call God a parent of any kind to me is still not worthy of what God really is. I mean, it's
Hmm.
almost like I can't even you just can't fathom God and his love and what he is. I mean, we'll never be able to. I don't think we're
Yeah.
meant to in this life. That's, personally, I think that we can try and it's fun. And I think that's God's going to continue to reveal, but yeah, I mean, God is so I'd say that I'm probably I'm trying to word how I would word this. There's certainly I think I've grown a ton, but my obedience to God and the scriptures does not come from strictly from legalism now and performance,
Hmm.
but I think it's born from love and I think that that's allowed me to accept my own shortcomings and my own personality and different characteristics of myself much more so, knowing that God made me this way. God didn't make any mistakes when he made me. And because of that, I don't have to be afraid or not embrace aspects of my character like that.
Wow. That's a cool way of looking at it. That's awesome. So when so these stories that have come up and you find this podcast, right? And you're listening to all these stories, you've shared a little bit of it. Like initially, like how does it feel hearing all of it? Like this thing that like you found a home at, essentially, kind of, and or yeah, you found a home at and this love and you love. How did it feel to hear these stories about it?
Well, I guess the best way I can say this is I'm not really married to a denomination.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I felt like a loyalty in a weird way. Like I'm a part of the church, the Big C church, like God's church. And that's not
Mm-hmm.
just the ICOC. It never was the ICOC, right? And I think that hopefully most people who are a part of what was the ICOC, I don't think the ICOC exists anymore. That's just my personal opinion, but um, would probably agree with me. So, but I think it really stinks. And again, that's not really a good enough word to use probably. But I need a
It's
stronger
okay.
word than that. But it's it,
Well,
it's tough to hear.
yeah. How did you get to that place where you can say like you mentioned the Big C church? Like how did you get there to feel like you go to a church but you're a part of something bigger? Because honestly, like that was something that like no, I was a this it was the church. It was the church and that's it. So how'd you get to that
Yeah,
place?
I think it's I think when you meet other people that are inarguably disciples, like that are 100% disciple, like you're like, man, this guy is unbelievable. And he doesn't go, and they're not a part of the ICOC. And I
Mm-hmm.
just keep running into people like, like you think about teachers like David Bercel, and
Mm-hmm.
who are amazing Christian authors and teachers. They're not part of the ICOC, and I think we were grown up to have such a sectarian view,
Mm-hmm.
right, of that we were the only ones that were saved. And I think that when you study theology at any point, you're gonna, Wayne Grudem, another guy, one of my favorites, Dallas Willard. He was never a
Mm-hmm.
part of, so you meet all these amazing minds and all these amazing people that think a lot like you do, that have the same viewpoints about Christ and Scripture, but they're not a part of, but they want to fellowship with other people. Like there are groups of people that have similar viewpoints, whether it be conservative, or liberal viewpoints in Christianity, that meet together all the time. there's conferences that are filled with people
Mhm.
that are, that are all really conservative, right? Maybe, and so they all want to get together and they all want to talk about theology or their doctrine or just different things within their what they what they maybe they're just teaching seminars, whatever it might be, right? And I think that the more you continue, like I have a friend who told me that when he left the ICOC, it was one of the best moves that he ever made. He's one of the most well-learned spiritual guys I know. Like just unbelievable Bible scholar, and he just is so tight with God, has a great family. Um, and he left, he said the best thing for him was leaving the ICOC in order for him to do that, right? Um, so yeah, I don't know. I guess it's just a gradual progression and a maturity that I'm grateful to have in a sense. But I think that you can't look at the Bible and read the stories in it and read Jesus's teachings and look at the gospel and the kingdom and say, oh no, it's just the ICOC. It's just this
Mhm.
church. There's just no way, you know, it's just not possible.
Well, a lot of people just that's the hard part. That's the hard thing is a lot of people, I think, associated that history as our history, you
Well,
know?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard because, if you really look at the history of Christianity, and I'm talking like pre-Nicene Creed, like the very early church, fathers, the very early church writings, up until now. I mean, there's been so many, you know, um, schisms and breakoffs, and arguably, since people have really had copies of Bibles, right? You could argue that
Mhm.
since lay people have had the ability to read and a copy of a Bible, the church has splintered like dramatically, right? So, um, you know, do I think that Mormons and Seventh Day Adventists are Christians? I don't know, man. I mean, like, I'm not. I'm so over arguing some of that stuff. Like, I used to be super into like arguing theological points, and I think God's going to figure all that out.
Mhm.
And I don't have to really do that. Now, does that mean I want to be a Mormon? No. Do I think that their doctrine's right? No, I don't. But I'm not going to sit there and say they're going to go to hell, or like that what they believe is like, you know, damaging or whatever. It's like
Mhm.
I think that within reason, I'm able to hold my beliefs while also respecting somebody else's. Now we can have a debate about doctrine, and I can tell you why I disagree with you, but I mean, I think we should still be able to fellowship and talk and love each other.
Sounds like there's a lot more important things to be talking about than spending all our time arguing over who's right and who's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to go to the church that you agree with, and that's fine, right?
Mhm.
Like there's churches that I wouldn't go to because I disagree with some of the doctrine they teach, and that's okay. But
Yeah.
that you may not, you may have different opinion than that, right?
Mhm.
I can only do what's best for myself and for my family. I can only lead my family, in what I feel is the best direction, and you're going to do the same thing with yours, right? We can have talks, we can have debates, we can go back and forth, but at the end of the day, me just sitting here telling you that you're going to go to hell is not going to do much for you probably. And I
Yeah.
mean, so I'm much more interested in having dialogues, I guess, about what we can do as Christians, as believers. And if people want to get down to the nitty gritty, I'm also happy to have those conversations as well.
Mhm.
But from a
Gotcha.
sectarian standpoint, it's just so old, man.
Yeah. Mhm. Totally. So, sorry, I'm looking at my questions.
No,
So
you're good.
I mentioned like what do you think the responsibility is of people like still in the church when conversations and issues like this come up? Because
Hmm.
sometimes, I mean, I hear people push back on having conversations like this, or like when things come up, it's like a either they want to dismiss it or they don't want to talk about it because it makes them feel uncomfortable or something like that. I don't know. What do you think about what people should be, what their responsibility is?
Yeah, um, that's a tough one because I um I was trying to think if I ever remember hearing. I mean, that certainly can happen. not it has happened, excuse me, many a time in the church. So what do I think the responsibility of people should be? I mean, yeah, you should absolutely listen to people and air their grievances. I'm sorry, but that's what you're paid for, right? I mean,
Hmm.
as a leader, and especially if you're an elder, if you're an elder in the church and you're ignoring the flock, then I don't really understand what you're doing. I mean, the eldership to me is the pinnacle of leadership in the church. And
Yeah.
that to me is the reason why the ICOC did so poorly in the beginning, is because of the eldership. But the point of what I'm trying to say as far as responsibility goes is that, yeah, I mean, I just can't imagine somebody coming up to an elder now, because I know a lot of the elders of the church that I'm a part of, and I respect them and they're amazing people, and being like just blowing something off. But so the fact that it happened, it's really rough. But I have people who ask me why I'm still in the ICOC, and one of the primary reasons I feel like I am is because I feel like I want to stop that. I don't.
What do you? Oh, okay.
I think if everybody leaves who thinks the way I do per se, then nothing ever changes, right? And there's still people that are part of the ICOC that may feel like that they need to still voice things that are being unheard. And if I can just help a couple people, you know, then I feel like that to me is worth staying. I could go find another church. I mean, I think you need to go somewhere. I think you need to be plugged into a church. I think that that's biblical to be a part of a church. I
Hmm.
don't think Christianity is something you just do at your house by yourself. Um, but yeah, I think, yeah, again, I think it's a responsibility of the eldership and the evangelists to absolutely listen to people and I don't know, dig into some of that stuff, man. I mean, like some of the stories I hear from your podcast of people of sexual abuse, of people being manipulated, coerced. I don't hear much of that stuff anymore. I mean, for what it's worth,
Hmm.
maybe that means nothing to some people out there, but I mean, it's horrible, man. I don't know what to say. It's like,
Yeah.
what should, like, people ask me about the lawsuit all the time too. I'm like, yeah, those people should be punished. I mean, like, if there's justice to be done, let it be done.
Yeah. Hmm.
I have no qualms. I mean, I always say to my wife all the time, whenever we're talking about something that's really tough, I say, listen, God will not be mocked. If there were
Hmm.
people in the church that were abusing people sexually or otherwise, they will get retribution. If there's eldership in the church that are not listening to their people, they're not listening to their
Hmm.
congregation, they will be held accountable by God. That is their role. And so if they choose to not take that role seriously, or to whatever, that they are answerable to God. And that to me would be a pretty scary place to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder all the time why people have such an issue when stories like this come up and talking about it.
Well, I think it goes back to the roots of the ICOC in the sense that,
Hmm.
so when the ICOC was really taking off, I don't think people understand how wild it was for this to happen. Like, the Church of Christ hadn't really experienced much growth. Like, they had kind of been stagnant for years. It was kind of like your
Yeah.
grandparents' stuffy old church, right? That you showed up to, and there was no instruments, and it was very rigid, right? And
Hmm.
people, it did not attract anybody. Well, all of a sudden, this young CEO type guy by the name of Kip McKean, right? And
Yeah.
guys like Chuck Lucas, who are like, well, wait a minute, we're gonna set this thing on fire. And not only that, but they're really good at it,
Hmm.
right? So these guys, they come around, they get converted, they have this sold out movement, right? And they're gonna evangelize the entire world in a year. And these guys are like, these guys are super ambitious, type A, just and so they start doing that. And all of a sudden you are having 100 baptisms a year in a church that had like 7 in the last like 10 years, right? And all those 7 people were like family members of other people, like.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden the eldership is like, well, so then let's say something comes up, right? In this Church of Christ, well, hey, so and so's doing this, but there's also this weird like sin that's going on from this person as well. Then you got to think to yourself as an elder, well, hang on a minute, like I guess we'll deal with the sin ourselves, but we just had 150 baptisms last year. Like, so God must be with us, right? Obviously, He is with us here. He's ordaining this because we are just exploding in numbers. And I think that that's the precedent that was set, was you had young CEO, type A, go-getter type guys that, by the way, were young, man. Then when these guys were like Kip and these guys were doing what they were doing, they were like in their 20s.
I know.
So could you imagine being in your 20s and all of a sudden you're like, you just keep climbing at this top, this organization that's growing by thousands of people. And all of a sudden, you go from being a minister that's hired into a Church of Christ, and you have eldership over you, to essentially ascending your way past that. So the elders don't even want to mess with you because you are like the reason that this is all happening. So in your mind, you ascend to this power where you become untouchable. And then when something like this happens, you don't want to ruin the image of the church because you've already built this unbelievable thing. So what should have happened was that the eldership should have stepped in way back then and said, dude, this is wrong. I don't care if we lose every single person that you converted this year. We have to stop this right now because this is wrong, and you need to take control of the sin. You need to fix this before, we got to talk about this. We need to air this out. We need to handle this. But instead, what happened was it wasn't, right? I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
it was more or less brushed under the rug, and it was handled incredibly poorly. There's no other way to say it. I know it was handled really bad. So now, even though you have all these amazing things that happened in our church movement over the last 20 years, it's all been tainted because of the fact that,
a lot of people argue about how the foundation of our church is built on the sins of these guys, right? They say that, because there were things that these guys have done, and it was just like you were saying, it wasn't handled, it wasn't talked about. I've read news articles from the 70s where both the guys are mentioned numerous times about the grooming and those type of things, and it's just, the people say that it was like, a lot of people say it was flawed from the start,
well, I certainly think we're paying for that sin. I think we have paid for it. I think the ICOC crumbled.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But I think that, again, I think God will not be mocked. And I think that you've seen the fruit of these men. And I don't think it's been great.
Yeah, it's weird though to watch because you see how one church becomes another church, then becomes another church, and it's like, it's just it just shows that people are searching, and people that they're not they want it so bad. These leaders, they want to keep their things, and they want to have it.
Yeah. I know. Yeah.
But I think it goes back to something we said before we started recording, was the people care more about the thing than the people in the thing,
No, I 100% agree. And I think, so my main focus, I think now when I think about fruit and think about is the health of the people in the church.
Yeah.
So we cared so little about the health of the people. Now we would care about their performance, but we didn't care about their spiritual health and maturity. So you had so few people that were maturing that when the letter came out, so many people just left, because why would they stay? I mean, they were there for a specific purpose and a specific reason, but they didn't have any foundation. And I'm not saying that people who left shouldn't have. I'm just saying that I think the reason that so many people were able to just walk away from, some of the people were just walked away from Christianity altogether because of everything that happened. But again, I think, like we talked about, I mean, I think that the sins of, I don't know if I would call like the original sins of the ICOC. I know some guys have some videos out there. Have you watched those of the original sins of the ICOC?
Some of them, yeah, some of them.
So I don't know if I necessarily would say that, but I would say that all the great things that those guys, quote unquote, have done will be potentially looked at as not being that way because of the fact that, and I don't think that that's totally wrong. You
Mhm.
know, if I don't know, I mean, if I do all these amazing things at a company and I'm a CEO and I bring it from a multi-million dollar company to a multi-billion dollar company, but in the process I screw everybody over or I abuse people. I mean, I don't know. It seems like to me that the legacy I would leave is not great. But I also want to say I don't know the full story behind a lot of that stuff as far as like
Mhm.
what was done, what wasn't done. So I don't want to pretend to understand all of that fully.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know, man. It's tough. It makes me sad, honestly, when I hear people talk about their experiences in our church. Again, I'm not married to our church. And I don't hate that people are upset at all. Like they're rightly to be they're right to be upset, but like I hate when people just walk away from God because of that. Not just the
Mhm.
church. I mean, you want to leave the ICOC, go. I'll shake your hand on the way out. I don't really care. But it's when people who I know, even my family members who have just walked away from God completely because of things that happened in our church that really make me sad.
Mhm.
Because I think had some of those guys who started our church known that was going to happen, they may have done things differently. Maybe not. Um,
Yeah.
but I also just want to say again that the way that the church was supposed to have been set up in the New Testament was that you have a plurality of eldership that are elected by the people of the church to govern the flock of the church. And they're over the
Mhm.
evangelists, they're over the teachers, they're over the deacons. They are the ones that have the authority in the church. And I think again that is where the ICOC early on went so awry. Had you had a strong, good elder to come in and say, look, you are out of line, dude. This is wrong. What we're doing is wrong. And not only that, but like we cannot cover these things up. We cannot brush this under the rug. This has got to be dealt with and it's got to be dealt with now. I don't care how many people we lose. I don't care, but this we have to do the right thing. And we didn't.
Mhm. Yeah, this happens a lot with churches, especially with churches where they see this massive growth. You have these celebrity pastors, where basically it goes from becoming a church of, a structured with leadership and, you're saying deacons, elders, all this stuff. Really, it becomes this person's idea. I talked one time about how we weren't really a church. We were this one man idea. And so we were following one man and his mission. And that's what happens with a lot of these churches. These guys come in and they're charismatic and they say some great things and they get a lot of people to come in. And then, like you mentioned earlier, you're seeing all this growth. You don't want it to lose it. And then they get this they feel this power, you know. And so then some would say they start bullying, they just start running with things, they start doing stuff. And you end up with these churches like ours, or I could name a dozen, you know, but they just end up
My boy Mark
focused.
Driscoll, man.
Yeah, we can Mark Driscoll. God, that guy.
Dude,
Um,
I had to say one really funny thing about Mark Driscoll, okay? Just
yeah, sure.
one really funny thing. So the best part of that story, and again, if anybody who listens to your podcast went to Marcel, I'm really sorry, but this is so funny. The fact that he went on to his own internet forum for his church, disguised himself as William Wallace, and roasted his own church members.
Oh
It's just got
yeah.
to be,
Mhm.
it's got to be one of the most wild things I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, if those of y'all listening have no idea what we're talking about, Mark Driscoll was a pastor of a church, Mars Hill in Seattle, and there's a wonderful podcast. It's like 10 episodes on the rise and fall of the church and him and all of that. I highly recommend it. Yeah, he has a I think it's him. I could be wrong, but there's this pastor that he's recreated Bible stories where like the apostles and Jesus are jacked. They like it's specifically like really jacked dudes. Um that I'm
Oh, that's
just
so great, man. He's like
but
he's like the Andrew Tate of pastors.
oh gosh, wow. You said it, not gonna
That's so funny.
edit that out. But yeah, like we focus on the person and it ends up that's what makes it all fall down. And it creates nothing but toxic culture, you know? And that's when you have things happen like we happened and the hurt and the trauma, and then you insert any other church. I mean, that's just what happens, you know?
Yeah. I think too, the thing that I've realized is that so a lot of the the elders and the older members of the church I'm a part of, we're a part of that. Even my in-laws were a part of that, and they were in the ministry with Kip and everything. And a lot of people just had no idea, man. Like a lot of people had no idea. And no, don't get me wrong, certain people definitely did. And again, I'm not trying to justify or whatever, but that your average member and even your average leader that was a part of this movement really didn't understand and know what was going on at the time, I think, just from talking with a lot of them. Um, and it's so funny, like the amount of apologies people have made to each other over the years of like, gosh, I'm really sorry I was crazy to you back then. I'm really sorry that I was your discipler and I like kind of lorded it over you, or I, you know, treated you a certain way. I was manipulative. I was whatever. It's like there was so much like you're talking about. There was so much pressure from the people above to get people in line,
Mm.
um, that it just got so out of control.
Yeah. And my hope is that like people listen and because they're like 90% of people, there's nothing that they can really do about this other than listen and not just write these people off. Because unless you were the perpetrators, there's not much you can do about it. But my hope is that people will just
Right.
listen and understand that this was their story. And their story doesn't negate your story. It's just it just shows the complexity of this thing that we were all in. And so I hope that people can listen and be open to at least understanding, because that leads to the openness leads to understanding, and that understanding leads to empathy. And then it could end up to like apologies and like people, I don't know, to like not let this happen again, you know?
Yeah, you know, I want to be like idealistic and say that like it won't. Um, and that's I think that, but I think you're right. I think it takes people to actively kind of push back. This is again, this is anecdotally. This is just my experience with what I've seen and whatever is the remnants of the ICOC now. But I feel like there's a huge maturing that has taken place in a lot of those respects. Um, Now, are there remnants of things that happened in old cultures? Of course. But I think there's enough people like myself, I guess I would include myself in this, that try to push back a lot. I've already written letters to the elders of the church I'm a part of. I'm not afraid to voice my opinions on things. I'm not afraid to get my hands dirty in the sense of like, if I see something that I feel like is wrong, in a respectful way, going in. And I felt like that my grievances were listened to. And
Mhm.
I even had one or two elders approach me and talk to me about that. So, you know, I feel like I love a lot of the people of the church I'm a part of. Um, and I believe that most people there are genuine and are trying to do the right thing.
Mhm.
And so I want to continue to foster that. And there's some unbelievable Christians that are a part of this church and people that are genuinely trying to do the best that they can. And yeah, again, I think providing the benefit of the doubt, and I don't know, if you don't hear from somebody, try again, get other people. I mean, there's a Matthew 18 way to go about this, right? If you go to talk to somebody and they don't listen to you, you bring somebody else. If they don't listen to you, then you bring somebody else, and then you bring it in front of the church. You know, there's a method that obviously Jesus knew for handling conflict in the church and conflicts with other disciples. And it's not like before, where it's like, you have one person, two people that come to you that are like these both leaders that are just going to sit there and pound you to the ground, right? It's a plurality of people that are helping make and understand these decisions. Now I feel like the pendulum's only almost swung so far in the other direction, to where the eldership can't even make a decision anymore because they're so like unsure at times of how to make a good decision, while also, there's so many things coming into the eldership all the time. Like, think about one Sunday service, they sing a contemporary Christian song, they sing a hymn, they do a communion, and they do a sermon. The amount of complaints they're going to get about, I don't like contemporary music, we should only do hymns. I don't like hymns, we need to play more contemporary stuff, this isn't the 1950s anymore. Why do we do the contribution talk at church anymore? This is silly, we shouldn't be doing that anymore. I don't like the sermon, the microphone wasn't loud enough. It's just, but I mean, again, you're right, that shouldn't negate people from being able to speak up about, like, hey, I feel like this culture we have in this way is wrong. Can we talk about this as a church and see what we can do? And like, I respect that a lot of churches that I'm seeing now are doing that. Like, I know one of the churches here in Atlanta just had this massive year-long study on gender roles, and they arrived on a conclusion, right? But I respect the fact that they're like, we're going to actually tackle this now, or whatever it might be, right? Maybe it's the Eucharist, maybe it's baptism, maybe it's atonement, maybe it's apostolic succession. I don't know, but I'm just saying,
You threw a lot of big words right there.
well, I'm just saying that, like,
No, it's good. Yeah.
Whatever it is, like, I feel like, I don't know, I feel hopeful that, so after I listened to some of your podcasts, and I've actually read most of the lawsuit. I went up to one of our elders and I said, what would y'all do if somebody came to y'all right now and said, hey, I need to report something in confidence? He says, we would not keep it confident. He said, we are now like and I think they made an announcement at some point, but they're basically like, we cannot, if you come to us and say that you've committed a crime, that you have raped somebody, or that you have you have killed somebody, or you robbed a store, I don't know, whatever you did, like, they are going to get authorities involved. I think they have learned now, thank God, after all this time, that what they were doing before was not working and was wrong. Because you're right, when the church has to deal with an internal matter like that, sometimes, I mean, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
It's like, you can pay for somebody's therapy, I guess, but it's like, you really need to get in there, and especially on some of these really egregious things. If there's sexual abuse involved, then there needs to be some serious punishment and retribution, or there needs to be proper judgment.
And you said that they made that announcement at church. They said the
I
authorities will get involved.
I think that at some point, and I hope I'm not butchering this, but I feel like when I
Okay.
was talking to him, he said that the people, I think the way he worded it was that the people in our congregation understand that if they were to come to us, we will help them. We will walk with them through all of this process, but that things like this are going to have to be handled properly. Now, I hope that doesn't make it to where people won't come forth, but at least that's what he expressed to me, was that they I can't remember what it's called. It's something like, have to do with like they have to report it. Like, it's a therapist. If you tell your therapist you're going to commit
Oh,
suicide,
it's a oh my gosh, I should know this because we were as
as
teachers, we
teachers.
were this. As teachers, you had to report anything that happened. Oh, I hate that I don't know what this word is. This happens too much. Um, but yeah, legally, if you are like a teacher or you're a therapist, or if you're working for the state or something like that, you are by law required to bring it to the proper authorities. Like, if a kid came up to me and said my parents sexually abused me, well, I can't keep it a secret. And if I keep it a secret, then I will be charged along with the parent. I
Right.
think that's how it
And
works.
I would just, I can just tell you that, and my close guy friends and my close circles, most of the guys agree that people agree that are my age that like we don't want that kind of stuff to be to happen to where it causes anything like we we hadn't previously
Yeah.
with things kind of being like I don't give a crap about the image of a church. And if there's
Mhm.
sin involved, it needs to be dealt with because this is supposed to be God's house. I mean, this is God's people. The church, church really is just it's a group of people.
Yeah.
And if things can't be transparent there, the world's already a mess, and if people can't trust that there's sin in the church 1,000% because it's full of people. And if you can find me anybody in the Bible who is a faithful man and an unbelievable patriarch of the faith that didn't have sin in his life, then maybe Job. But I mean, for the most part, there's going to be sin, but I would much rather know. And I'd much,
Mhm.
we recently had one of our ministers come up and share something that was really personal going on in his life. And some people were like, "This is too TMI. Like, I don't need to know this." But in my mind, I'm like, "Wow, he's really just fighting to be transparent with everybody
Mhm.
here as a minister, as a leader in the church, and he's setting an example for what he feels like leadership looks like, which is transparency."
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah, transparency is key. I think a lot of people, in my observation, it seems that the leaders of churches don't think that people can really handle transparency. Like the thought is
yeah,
that like if someone were to come forward and say this happened, then there'd be like a mass exodus or people can't handle that. But I think the more people feel that you're being transparent with them, the more they trust you, they'll respect you, they will be there. We need more transparency with regards to that. Um, I wish I had had more of that growing up from leaders and from
oh,
other
absolutely,
people, you know? And it's like
yeah,
I think if a leader of a church were to get up and say, like, for instance, for some past stories, it was like someone in the kids ministry like inappropriately touched a kid. Like if a pastor came up and said that to the church, I would be like, okay, I would be like, all right, and that's what I need, that's what we need to hear. We need to hear that something happened and it's being handled, right? You know
yeah,
what I mean? Like that's what we need to hear. We don't need it to be swept under the rug. Like respect us enough to understand that we can handle hearing things. As long as we're hearing that yes, this happened and we're going to deal with it, you know?
right. I guess, and two, the other thing would be as long as the person wants, like, maybe if it's a young girl who got sexually abused, maybe she may not want people to know, but she's
Well,
okay with. But yeah,
what yeah, yeah. What I meant, like, I didn't mean like the pastor's like so and so was inappropriately touched.
yeah, I
I
know.
mean
I mean,
this
yeah, I
happened in the kingdom. Yeah.
know.
Um,
Yeah. No,
I
I
think more.
agree. I think that's changing though.
Yeah. I hope
And like
so.
so for instance at our church too, they do background checks on. I mean, it's funny that it's taken this long, right? But
Yeah.
then the world's changed though too. And maybe it hasn't, maybe it's always been this way, but I feel like it has changed some. But either way, I mean, they're doing background checks on teachers now. They're teaching kids. And like, I know that apparently in kids and babies classes aren't allowed to change their diapers anymore. They have to
Hmm.
come get their parents in the fellowship and I mean in the church, and they have to bring them back and do that, which, okay, good. You need to be above reproach in every way possible. So I mean that's awesome. I think that's great. And so, but I think it's just these are just things I think that we've probably never thought about, right? Like when I was a kid in the Kingdom kids in the ICOC, man, I don't ever remember thinking like, oh, this dude may touch me inappropriately. Like, I don't know. I was just worried about like, God, with this, I hope this person gives my parents a good report whenever I get picked up from class.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I
So
know. Me too. I've been spanked in a bathroom at a church service before because I was bad in the kids' kingdom. Anyway.
I'm sure I was too. But anyways, yeah. So
Yeah.
so yeah, I think again, just to kind of reiterate and kind of sum it all up, the ICOC needs to be responsible and own what happened. For even though most of those people aren't even around anymore, they're all in the ICC now, or they're whatever. Some of them are dead. I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
but to whatever extent there was wrong done, if there's apologies or reconciliations that need to be made, that's 1000% biblical. You need to
Yep.
do that.
Cool.
But
I
I
agree.
also think that people need to forgive, and I think that's hard. I think that's tough. There's anywhere in the Bible where it says forgiveness is an easy thing. And that doesn't mean that forgiveness is like, being a doormat. It doesn't mean that, that forgiveness is I don't know. But what forgiveness is something that as a Christian, that is a part of a characteristic that you embody, because Jesus forgives all of us for all of the egregious things that we do. And so who are we not to forgive each other? And I'm not saying that this is something I would excel at, right? If I had a child and they were raped, I don't know if I could forgive that person, but I know that would be what I would be charged to do. Like that would be my what I felt like the right thing to do would be eventually at some point to work towards that.
Mhm. Yeah, it's hard, especially, forgiveness is a very hard thing to do, you know.
Very. And it's tough. I mean, you're married, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
tough it's tough. Forgiveness is hard, but I think
Mhm.
it's essential. And I think, um, I think Jesus emphasized it so much because he knew how important it was. I mean, it's really a crux of our faith, right?
Mhm.
Is how we're forgiven by Jesus all the time for our sins. Um, and we have that example. We have obviously the ultimate example to achieve and strive towards. Um, but I think we can hold on one hand that the egregious things that happened in the ICOC were awful. And again, like I said before, that people need to, if there needs to be reconciliation, it needs to happen, and
Mhm.
people need to be open to that and understand that. Um, but I guess it's my hope that there can be some kind of healing, and that God can work through this somehow. I think that's the thing, is we really don't think God can be there and work through this, but God's bigger than all of this. He's bigger than
Mhm.
us. He's bigger than the ICOC. He's bigger than everything that's going on right now. And so that's really my prayer, is that somehow through this, there's God is able to be seen, whether it's through the justice that's done for some of these people that have had horrible things happen to them and have ruined their lives in some way psychologically, um, or it's from the ability of people to be able to forgive people, that have wronged them horribly.
Yeah. Mhm. Hoping for healing too. Yeah, man. So I asked this question every end of these episodes. We were in a cult.
I don't know. I mean, we had this conversation a little bit before we started
Yeah.
recording. I don't really think so, but because I always see cults as, like, again, like the Manson and the Branch
Yeah.
Davidians, and like,
Mhm.
I know we joked about how, like, I feel like if we were in a cult, then anybody who supports the UJ football team is in a cult. But yeah, I went there. I know. I don't look, man. I have no dog in the fight. All right, so, but I'm just
Oh
saying, like,
man. Yeah. Mhm.
people who, like, whose lives and livelihood and everything that they like, I'm sorry, if your weekend and your whole week is ruined because your football team lost, like, you think they know who you are or give a crap about you? Like, but it's like
Yeah.
we spend thousands of dollars on merchandise and tickets and get all super invested, and it's fun. I get it. It's cool. It's cool. But I don't think that's any more, I don't think the ICOC was any more cultish than any of that stuff. But was it coercive, manipulative? Did it hurt a lot of people? Was there a lot of abuse done? Absolutely. And there's nothing I can do about that personally, right? I can't go back in time and change any of that. And will I be a part of the ICOC for the rest of my life? I don't know. But from where I'm at right now, I'm good. I'm good with where I'm at. Well, with as far as the church I go to, I see people trying to change, people trying to turn over that, trying to reconcile and learn from those things. But I believe that if people stay that want change and just trust the process and continue to fight for that, whatever it might be, then I think that listen, I'm going to be there until they kick me out. So that's what I'll just say.
Well, I like the outlook. Thank you for coming on. Thanks for sharing your story with us.
Yeah, it was fun, man. I hope I didn't go too long.
Nah, man, you did good. Right on.
Thank you.
Again, thank you all for your support of this growing conversation. That is, we were in a cult. If you or someone you know was a member of the ICOC, ICC, and would like to come on and share their story, please reach out to me via email at clemenswithaz@gmail.com, or you can direct message me, Clemens with a Z Instagram page. If you'd like to support the podcast, the easiest way is to like, rate, review, subscribe, all of those things, and share this episode or other episodes with friends that you think this might be something that could lead them towards healing in their own lives. If you'd like to support the podcast financially, you can go to the GoFundMe that I've created that will be in the show notes, as well as a link in the bio on the Clemens with a Z Instagram page. Until next time, everyone, remember, just a channel. I ain't the source. Peace.